Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to this CarFacts Garage explainer. Picture this. You're driving along, not a care in the world, the radio's playing, and suddenly, bam! That dreaded check engine light flickers on and settles into a steady, menacing glow. Your heart just sinks, right? You take it to the shop, they plug in their little scanner, and out spits a code that has ruined literally countless afternoons. P0420. The mechanic leans over the counter, looks you in the eye, and delivers the absolute gut punch.
Yeah, that's going to be your catalytic converter, they say. You're looking at about $1,500 and, on some vehicles, it's $2,000 or even $3,000. But hey, before you panic, and definitely before you hand over a single dime or sign any work order, just take a breath. Because what we are uncovering today is that a massive percentage of the time, this is a complete misdiagnosis. You could literally be on the verge of replacing a hugely expensive part packed with precious metals when the real fix is sitting right in front of you for a tiny fraction of the cost.
Section 1. What P0420 actually means.
So, to take back control of your car and your wallet, we have to aggressively demystify this mechanic jargon. Let's look at exactly what the code reads. Catalyst system efficiency below threshold, bank 1. Now notice what it does not say. It doesn't say your converter is physically shattered into pieces. It doesn't say it's melted. And it certainly doesn't say you owe $1,500. All this code actually means is that a single efficiency reading is low. It's just data. And there are several completely different things that can drag that specific reading down, most of which have absolutely nothing to do with a dead converter.
Now, what's really fascinating here is how your car's computer actually calculates that efficiency. Think of it like a before and after test. You have two oxygen sensors, one upstream before the converter and one downstream right after it. When the converter is perfectly healthy, that upstream sensor is swinging wildly up and down, while the downstream sensor stays nice and steady. The converter has done its job and smoothed the exhaust out. But if that downstream sensor simply gets old, lazy, and coated in carbon buildup, it starts sending a sloppy, jagged signal that mirrors the upstream one. The computer sees that, absolutely panics, and throws the P0420 code. So a dirty, cheap sensor is literally faking a total converter failure. Crazy, right?
Section 2. Check cheap causes first.
That single distinction we just talked about? It's the difference between a massive repair bill and a cheap Saturday afternoon project. Just look at this contrast. Your downstream oxygen sensor is often just $40 and a 20-minute fix with a single wrench. Or how about a sneaky exhaust leak near the sensors that's letting outside oxygen sneak in and scramble the readings? Patching or welding that might cost you, what, $20? And then there's the biggest culprit. Misfires from old spark plugs dumping raw, unburned fuel straight into your exhaust. A fresh set of plugs is usually well under $100. You absolutely have to rule these cheap fixes out first, because if you don't, you are literally throwing your hard-earned cash straight in the trash.
Section 3. The 30-minute Italian tune-up. But okay, what if you've checked all the cheap stuff and the converter really is the issue? Well, if it's not rattling underneath your car like a tin can full of pebbles, and your car doesn't feel totally choked of power, it might just be clogged up with carbon from years of short, low-speed city trips. Here is the exact blueprint to save it. Mechanics actually call this the Italian tune-up. First, you grab a quality catalytic converter cleaner and pour it into about a quarter tank of gas so it stays highly concentrated. But here is where everyone messes up. You can't just putter around town to the grocery store. That cleaner needs screaming sustained heat to work. So safely get on the highway. Manually drop your transmission down a gear to keep your engine humming between 2,500 and 3,000 RPM, and just hold it there for 30 solid minutes. This creates a blazing hot, high-volume stream of exhaust that incinerates the baked-on gunk inside the honeycomb. It's basically acting like a self-cleaning oven. It's a $40 fix that can genuinely bring a lazy converter right back from the brink.
Section 4. Avoid the pay-twice trap.
Now, whether you clean your converter or you eventually do have to replace it because it physically melted down, I have to warn you about the absolute worst-case scenario. Let me tell you about Frank. Frank paid another shop $1,400 for a shiny, brand-new catalytic converter. And guess what? Just 3 months later, the exact same P0420 code was back, glaring right at him from the dash. Why? Because the shop never actually looked at why the old one died in the first place. Frank had a misfire from tired, worn-out spark plugs. It was dumping raw fuel into the exhaust, and it quietly cooked his brand-new converter exactly the same way it cooked the first one. Frank paid a fortune to fix his symptom, while the disease just kept right on running. You absolutely must fix the root cause.
Section 5. Root disease number 1. Air and fuel confusion.
Frank's story brilliantly illustrates our first major root disease, air and fuel confusion. You see, when your engine's computer can't properly calculate how much air is actually coming in, it panics and dumps way too much fuel into the mix. That rich condition goes straight down the exhaust pipe. And people constantly confuse the two sensors responsible for this. You have the MAF, the mass airflow sensor, which sits in the intake tube right after the air filter, directly measuring the incoming air. Then you have the MAP, the manifold absolute pressure sensor, mounted right on the intake manifold, measuring pressure and vacuum to estimate the engine load. If either of these get dirty or fail, your car runs rich, it hesitates, and it idles rough. And if you ignore it, that unburned fuel will literally melt your converter's ceramic honeycomb into a solid, useless brick.
Section 6. Root disease number 2, the throttle body mistake.
Another massive airflow problem is a dirty throttle body causing a rough, shaking idle. The throttle plate gets crusted with carbon over tens of thousands of miles. But when well-meaning drivers try to clean it themselves, they often trigger an entirely new disaster that forces the car straight into limp mode. Here are the golden rules. Never ever just blast cleaner into the throttle body while it's still bolted to the intake. It flows backward and shorts out your sensitive sensors. Never clean the plate with the battery connected, or the ECU records the wrong plate position. And the absolute biggest mistake? Skipping the 10-minute ECU reset. If you clean the plate but don't disconnect the battery for 10 minutes to clear out the old airflow data, your engine will literally shake violently because the computer is still using outdated fuel ratios for this newly cleaned air gate.
Section 7. Root disease number 3, oil poisoning.
And that brings us to the third, and frankly the most dangerous underlying converter killer, oil poisoning. If your engine is burning oil internally, it travels straight down the exhaust and literally glazes over those expensive precious metals inside the converter, suffocating it completely. And guys, no cleaner in a bottle can fix that. But where exactly is the oil coming from? Mechanics actually often confuse these two completely different engine wear points. You have worn valve stem seals at the top of the engine, which let oil slowly drip down into the cylinder. Then you have worn piston rings located around the pistons at the bottom, which lose their tension and allow oil to pass upwards from the crankcase. Knowing which one you actually have is the difference between a fairly straightforward top-end seal replacement and a massive, crazy expensive bottom-end engine rebuild.
So, here is your ultimate diagnostic cheat sheet to figure it out. If you see a puff of blue smoke, mainly when you cold start the car after it's been sitting overnight, or maybe right after idling in a long red light, that is oil dripping down from worn valve seals. But if you are billowing blue smoke steadily under heavy acceleration and the engine just feels weak, that points directly to bad piston rings causing low compression. Seriously, do not rebuild your entire engine block if you only needed valve seals.
Section 8. Empowering the DIY mechanic. Now let's bring this all together, because once you understand these systems, whether we're talking about oxygen sensors or ECU relearns, car maintenance completely stops being this terrifying mystery and becomes a super accessible, step-by-step process. To prove just how empowering DIY mechanics can actually be, consider something almost everyone overpays for at the shop: brake pads. You can literally do this in 5 minutes per wheel. You simply remove 2 caliper bolts, slide the old pads out, and pop the new ones in. Because the new pads are thicker, you just compress the hydraulic cylinder back down. You can use a cheap $20 tool online, or honestly, even just the wooden handle of a hammer. Finally, you apply some high-temp grease to the smooth edge of the bolts, not the threads, just the smooth part, to prevent rust and allow the caliper to glide perfectly. Tighten it all back up, and boom, you just saved yourself hundreds of dollars in shop labor.
And that brings us full circle right back to that glowing check engine light and that terrifying $1,500 quote. You now have the roadmap. You know to check that $40 oxygen sensor first. You know exactly how to run a 30-minute high RPM Italian tune-up. And most importantly, you know that if you don't hunt down the underlying misfire, the airflow issue, or the burning oil, you are basically destined to destroy your expensive new parts all over again. So I'll leave you with this one final thought. Will you step up, fix the actual disease, and keep your hard-earned cash? Or will you just pay twice for the symptom? The choice is entirely yours. Thanks so much for joining this CarFacts Garage Explainer, and we will catch you on